Hey, welcome to the show, Total Financial Solutions, Safer Money Hour. I'm Arif Halaby, along with Jeff Gerard here every week at this time, talking about your family's finances, of course, helping you get out of debt, manage money, plan for your future. And occasionally we have special guests as well. Well, you're in treat for today. We have Carlos Solano with us. He's going to share with us some ideas on his time, if you will, during a career that spanned law enforcement and maybe a little bit more. I'm not sure how much you want to share with us, so I'm going to leave that over to you. Carlos, tell me a little bit about this book that you've written, but before that, about you.
Absolutely, Arif. Thank you and Jeff for having me on the show.
Of course.
And just in a nutshell, been a cop for about 32 years now. Actually retired a few years ago. I'm now a consult, and as a civilian, still in the mix, helping out detectives. We provide a service for detectives to help them manage their cases with analytical tools and just the support that I wish I had had when I was a young officer and detective. But after about 32 years and seeing what I've seen, along with just the tide of the mood and change towards policing, motivated me to write this book.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of changes after 9/11 and all the things that are going with that. Tell me what you've seen in law enforcement tools itself, maybe pre-9/11, 2001, and post.
Absolutely. Pre-9/11, we all enjoyed, and it's a very comfortable setting. Just like I think if you're with family and friends, if nothing ever happens, kids aren't going to high school or college yet, everything's very good. But once dynamic enters into the family life or into community life, police work in particular, 9/11 pretty much rocked the world. And at that point, society had to make a call. Do our police still obviously can be professional and act nice, or do we have to treat them and recognize that they are in a different job now? It isn't Mayberry RFD where you go to the local store owner. Yes, there's still a need for that, absolutely, ties to the community, but there's also a real evil and a criminal mindset out there that wants to hurt societies, particularly our country now after 9/11.
Now, when you say there's a particular evil, there's certainly a group of people, maybe even some would say about half of America, that still believes that we just need to give these guys a hug. Maybe their mom looked at them a little funny when they were 2 or 7.
And no doubt, there is obviously time for that. You have to have, I believe, the carrot and the stick. And society, I think, realizes you have to have a little bit of that stick. We hold people accountable. We all have families. I hold my children accountable. I know you would. We should too. And if someone is robbing, hurting our people, we shouldn't just give them a hug. They might need medication. They actually might need help. A lot of times, I believe if we can get a person not to go into the criminal justice system, that's ideal.
Yeah.
But some folks really need to be tucked away, protected from themselves and us.
Well, we have a book that you've written here right in front of us. It's called The BS Behind the Badge, Carlos Solano. Tell me about The BS Behind the Badge. This is a book that you have written about your time in law enforcement, but what's the flavor of it? Why is it the BS behind the badge?
Because I think our society has forgotten what our officers have to really put up with. And in speaking to my peers throughout the years, the one theme that has come up is I always get, Carlos, you wouldn't believe the BS I had to put up with today. You wouldn't believe the BS with this job. Because frankly, it didn't used to be to the level where it's at now, where the scrutiny, technology, cell phones, right? A traffic stop that it was innocuous 20 years ago, 4 or 5 people may film it now because they think that gotcha moment's going to happen, that officer's going to come out with a baton, or there's going to be a raging gun battle. And unfortunately, that warps society's perception on how interaction occurs with cops. And a 2-second video will make an officer sometimes look really bad, but they didn't film the first 2 minutes of it where it led up to a 2-second confrontation that was absolutely justified.
You know, part of what you're dealing with, and I know you know my background is nearly 11 years law enforcement, LAPD. Jeff's mother was a sergeant with Burbank, worked both at the airport and with Burbank PD. 25 years?
Yep, close to 30.
Yeah, close to 30 years.
Yeah.
Great.
So there's a law enforcement history here that we have. It certainly is a perspective. And I even worked at night of Rodney King, and it was actually en route to that scene. Thank God we didn't go there. We turned around and had to go back to another call. But we were en route to that scene. And when you say, you know, what was it, a minute and 10 seconds or a minute and 18 seconds was that infamous
Correct.
part? Folks didn't see the part before where Rodney King kicked the guy that was hitting him with the club in the groin, and they both fell to the ground. They didn't film the part where he or they didn't show the part. It was filmed, but nobody showed it on TV, where he pulled out the taser darts with his hands, like you know, an Incredible Hulk type of a moment. And yet, I'm not justifying the act, but when you talk to people today, they don't even know that those. In fact, I'll give you a good example. You ask somebody how many other people were in the car with Rodney King. They go, "What do you mean? It was Rodney King?" No, how many other people were in the car? Well, nobody. Okay, look, there were 2 other people in the car, a passenger and a rear passenger. Both of them were African American. Both of them did exactly what they were told. None of them were beaten. They both went to jail or were detained or whatever the case was. And so yet the perspective in an entire trial, if you will, lives of many, many people were changed forever. What does your book have to say about the darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of a scenario that most law enforcement professionals find themselves in?
I basically call society on that is the BS behind the badge. We're not perfect, but at the same time, I think we get it right the bulk of the time. And to be put in such a critical decision-making arena, you have seconds to be Solomon, to be the psychiatrist, to be the therapist, to be that family friend. And you might have a gun in your face, you might have someone screaming, agitated. There's quite a lot more of a dynamic in police work that today is elevated. And that's where I just want to educate, get the word out. I've never went to work thinking, who do I get to hit today? What do I get to shoot today? That wasn't my goal.
And I don't think I ever worked with anybody like that. And Jeff, I don't know if your mom ever came home saying, I can't wait to hit somebody today or tomorrow when I go to work.
No, I would actually say it's the opposite. And any police officer I've ever spoken with, and mind you, my mom, having all those years on the force, acquired a few friends, and friends of the family is what they became. And I basically have grown up around law enforcement and have a respect for the folks that do that, both on the side of, wow, that's something that my mom does, and I can respect that level of responsibility you take, but also on the side as a civilian, I know just to get out of their way and do what you're told to do, because they're the ones that are the police. They're the authority, and they should be respected as such, because they're the ones that are going to take charge in the situation. And to your point a minute ago, Carlos, you were talking about, and you mentioned it somewhere in your, at least in the first part of your book here, about an officer having to be perfect. They're expected to be perfect when responding or reacting to some of these types of situations. I think that's a pretty high bar that we set as a society on them. And I think, your book speaks to that, where we have to give a little bit of leniency in the sense that we're human.
And that's exactly right. I'm trying to address the humanity of this profession. Again, it's a noble profession, as is being a doctor, a realtor, a teacher, a coach. But mistakes will happen. But you're right, we do have to cut a little more slack to the person who has to make that life and death decision. Just short of an ER doctor, I'd even compare this line of work to the military. There are some unbelievable stresses that the average person will never understand. Doesn't make them less of a person, but they need to at least be aware of it. And I point to that in the book, along with the perceptive of drug abuse.
Yeah.
That's also been something that's tearing at our fabric today.
Now, there's no question that today, especially, the follies, the mistakes, even the downright illegal activity of law enforcement is captured directly on video. Now, why is that an important thing? It's because all of us used to give the police officers benefit of a doubt. I can remember testifying, and they said, okay, officer, what other evidence? Well, it's just my word. And sometimes that wasn't, almost always that was enough, especially if the bad guy had a history. You put in there an officer that doesn't have integrity, or one that has a history of lying. And I remember, look, both sides of this, right? I remember there was one particular officer that I worked with, and I happened to know the city attorney at the time. And the city attorney said, we're not going to put that officer on the stand. I said, why is that? Because I believe that officer has a history of lying. I thought, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Nope. We're not going to put him on the stand. He doesn't have, I can't believe him. And this is the prosecution. So there are times when officers will have a bad rap. It gets permeated through their department, and they're known not to be trusted. Do I think sometimes officers overstep their bounds? I do. Sometimes I think they're caught up in the moment, but you forget that they're human beings. They have problems at home. Their kids are having issues at school, or they're having a fight with their wife, or they're having a problem, with their finances, and all of this can hinder. And we don't think that it's supposed to, but folks, they're people.
Absolutely right.
It's a different environment.
And you add to this, and you have too, no doubt. I've arrested police officers, but I've also arrested doctors, nurses, lawyers, school teachers, vice presidents. It's in all walk of
That's
life,
right.
and the police department truly should reflect its community. The diversity, along with some of societal's ills, unfortunately. But yeah, the permeation, I believe, in the ranks, if you read the news today or hear it, it's nowhere near the level. There's still 1 out of 10, right, there's a bad egg, but those other 9, those are the kids, those are the folks you want coaching your kids or as your next door neighbor.
I think we should hold, if we're going to hold law enforcement officers to that standard, I have no problem with that. You want perfection, but you do the same type of background investigation on lawyers before they get on the job, or your water and power guy.
Right.
I'll tell you what, you do
Right.
background investigations. For me, it was a 6-month program just to even consider
getting
getting.
motor vehicles.
Yeah. How about the folks that work at DMV that have access to your personal information and the history of some of those
Right.
that are actual criminals that work there, and they are identity thefts and even worse.
Yeah.
Right. No other profession is subject to, in some cases, random drug testing and background checks and polygraph, and federal criminal prosecution if you do your job wrong. Right.
Exactly. That bar has been set, and we both know, right, that background, that when they knock on your neighbor's door, and what was Carlos like when he was 15? Did he really get in that schoolyard
Summer
fight?
of 1995, a year before I became a financial person, my job, background investigator, LAPD.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I was fortunate because I lived up in the mountains, so I took the Ventura, the Santa Clarita, and the Kern County. We call them packages, and my job was to go drive around, and we always said it was about 100 contacts for every one officer. If you lived in an apartment, it was upstairs, downstairs, next door, each side, across the hall. Your job, so subordinates, if you were a supervisor, coworkers, managers. Your former job before that and before that. So it was fairly intricate. And I can tell you, there were people that we didn't hire, and I still
bet.
remember them. Certainly their circumstances and the reasons we didn't. But many other careers would have picked them up in a minute.
Right.
And you say, well, so when we come back, I want to touch on something that I think is kind of an issue, which is specifically some of the financial components. Because today, pensions more and more, and I know you're not a pension expert, but just from the day-to-day lifestyle of law enforcement and what your book has to talk about, the BS behind the badge, Carlos Solano. Great book. If you have law enforcement in your family, if you have a neighbor, if you want to understand their mindset a little bit, I think it's worth it to pick up this book. When we come back, we're going to get into some of the financial components and what we talk about, how some of the law enforcement guys today, it's not a bad financial job anymore, not like it used to be. When we come right back. I'm Arif Halaby, Total Financial Solutions Save for Money Hour. That's Jeff Gerard with special guest Carlos Solano. This is your place for news, talk, and information. And don't forget, folks, you can download the free KHTS app on your iPhone and your Android devices. And now you can listen to KHTS on the go wherever you are and access KHTS news. Folks, social media is a whole lot easier straight through that KHTS app. And the easiest way to get it is to go to your App Store, of course, or Google Play and search KHTS. I'm Arif Halaby. We'll be right back on Total Financial Solutions Safer Money Hour.